In this video, I'll tell you about 3 things that are becoming more grimdark than Warhammer. If you've been in the miniature wargaming hobby for a while, and especially if you've played some Warhammer, then you've probably heard the term grimdark thrown around. Grimdark is, by definition, a genre of fiction, especially fantasy fiction. A side note, here, fantasy is in contrast to, say, like historical fiction, right? So by saying fantasy here, they mean sci-fi, and fantasy and cyberpunk and all the stuff in between. Characterized by disturbing, violent, or bleak subject matter and a dystopian setting. According to Wikipedia, the term was inspired by the tagline for Warhammer 40,000, "In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war." Adam Roberts, a British sci-fi and fantasy novelist, describes it more as fiction where nobody is honorable and might is right. And he also believes that grimdark storytelling is designed to convey the sense that our own world is a kind of cynical, disillusioned, ultra-violent place. All this completely tracks with the creation of Warhammer 40,000 in the UK of the 1980s. From what I understand, it was a rough time over there, and it spawned the idea of grimdark fiction and art that we know today. But, as with many inventions, it's outgrowing and surpassing its inventor. Though Warhammer 40,000 in 2025 is still mostly grimdark in story and lore and that kind of stuff, especially the nobody is honorable and, might is right parts, it's surprisingly clean and parade ready when compared to most other things that we consider grimdark today. As far as the visuals of the models, even like way back in the old days of the 1980s, the models that GW would show off were pretty clean and frequently bright colors. One could say neither grim nor dark. Especially today, the box art images that the Warhammer studio produces are surgically clean. You could eat off the paint jobs of every model that you see, even Chaos models. Speaking of Chaos, I would say that Nurgle models are the closest to what we generally think of these days when we think of grimdark. But still, they're very different from what we see when we search the word grimdark on Instagram, for example. In 2025, I'd argue that grimdark starts where Warhammer left off and has taken it into a really interesting direction. Now, I'm going to talk about 3 things here that I think are surpassing, perhaps evolving is a nicer word, the grimdark that was. You've probably heard of them, but perhaps not. But there are 3 different newer interpretations of grimdark that I feel really bring something to the table. 2 of them are wargaming related, but one is a video game that really struck me as being a perfect distillation of where grimdark is going these days. And it's not a Warhammer video game, of which I've played many. First is the new miniature skirmish game called Trench Crusade, which you've probably heard of at this point. There's been a lot of videos about it and its massively successful Kickstarter at the end of 2024, including even a video by me. Pachow. It's an alternate history game where the Crusades of the 11th and 12th centuries just never ended. A portal to hell had opened in Jerusalem due to a bunch of things that happened and whatnot, and then Crusades, and now it's 1914, and the war has raged this entire time. The forces of hell versus the forces of the church. You'll notice I didn't say the forces of good. The lore and setting is the epitome of grimdark. The war has been raging for 800 plus years, and it doesn't look like there'll be any chance of it stopping anytime soon. Like I said, there isn't really a cut and dried like good guys versus bad guys narrative either. The forces of hell are certainly bad, but the trench pilgrims and even the Principality of New Antioch aren't exactly good either. They're definitely playing defense, right? Trying to protect Earth from the heretic forces coming through the portal and all that. But they're doing it in some morally odd ways, let's just say. Look up the Metachrist program if you want to find out more. But it's not just the story and the way it handles religious themes that's ultra grimdark. It's also the visuals. From what I understand, Trench Crusade was a visual idea before it was a game. Mike Francina, a concept artist on a bunch of the Diablo video games from Blizzard, started making illustrations and messing around building the world in his head. It wasn't until later that other folks, like Thomas Piernan, designer of Mordheim, another very grimdark title, got involved and brought the game to where it is today. And the visuals range from some darkly beautiful images to downright brutal ones, but more of them lean towards the latter than the former. It is a brutal time for all sides of the conflict. Constant war for the last 800 plus years has brought about some technologies far ahead of where, we were in the real 1914. But this centuries-long conflict has also ruined the Earth in many different ways, and mere survival is the best-case scenario of many people born to this time. To be a pilgrim in Trench Crusade is to die. There's simply a lot more blood in the imagery of Trench Crusade when comparing it to today's Warhammer. Also, many more severed hands as well. I suspect that Warhammer can't go as grimdark these days in comparison to Trench Crusade, for example, because they're such a big corporate intellectual property. Shareholders probably aren't very much into the level of exposed viscera that some of these visuals portray. So Trench Crusade can go really hard on the visuals and the sculpts and really bring the new levels of grimdark. As I mentioned earlier, though Warhammer brought about the concept of grimdark, the box art paint jobs of Warhammer models have never really seemed particularly grim or grimy, or dark to me. Especially these days, the paint jobs are clean and perfect in most situations. But if you see what Instagram creators and viewers consider grimdark, you'll see a very different visual language on display. And one of my favorite purveyors of the grimdark aesthetic are the folks over at GRIMDARK Compendium. GRIMDARK Compendium is a YouTube channel that's mostly all tutorials about how to paint in the grimdark style. And when they say grimdark, they mean it. Dark oil washes and enamel washes, added texture and physical grit on the models, distressing the surface of the model, all that kind of stuff. The figures from GRIMDARK Compendium really look proper grimdark when I think of the term these days. Their channel is full of tutorials about how to paint in the grimdark style, and I'd say it's far more adherent to the term than Warhammer paint jobs are these days. What's interesting is that most of the models that GRIMDARK Compendium paints in their tutorials are Warhammer models. They just end up looking very different at the end of those tutorials in comparison to the box art on the Warhammer website. The overall look is dim and grimy, and in many cases, desaturated. Very little in the way of bright colors. There's no bright blues or yellows. And in many cases, disturbing visuals and filth that can be kind of unsettling to look at. In my mind, this is what grimdark is supposed to look like. And GRIMDARK Compendium has taken it even further than just tutorials. Last year, they released their own line of enamel washes called Villainy Ink. It's a range of colors with names like Goon's Grime and Decay of Death and Ichor of the Damned, all darker colors of enamel wash designed to be applied to your kind of base painted models and then left to dry for 15 or 20 minutes or whatever, and then wiped away, basically painting as a reductive process. You're putting it on and then taking away in the highlights, but keeping all the little crevices and grungy areas and stuff really nice and dark and whatnot. This allows you to leave behind as much or as little grimdark on your model as you'd want. I really enjoy working with enamel washes. It gives a much more interesting and gritty look to my miniatures. Lastly, there's a video game I came across recently. I learned about it on YouTube, and the visuals and the play style really intrigued me, especially because of how extremely grimdark it is. It's called Forever Winter, which is a very grimdark title, of course, and it's a unique type of extraction shooter that I haven't seen before. There's a massive sci-fi war going on between two ultra-powerful forces, and you as the player are not on either side. You're a scavenger, just a weak human hiding in the cracks between and trying to survive. Everything in the world of Forever Winter is ruined. Nothing is clean or shiny. It's like kind of a post-apocalyptic world, except that no one told the soldiers and the giant mechs and the drones, so they just keep fighting after the apocalypse. In many situations, the two main forces pretty much just straight up ignore you if they come across you on the battlefield, because you're not a threat and they've got bigger problems than you. However, if you cause too much trouble trying to scavenge for clean water and food and stuff like that, and maybe you shoot a little bit at a couple of drones or whatever, they will then decide that you're now a threat, and they'll take appropriate action. This game fits true GRIMDARK so well. The visuals are spot on with the destroyed landscapes and grim and gritty color palette and the monstrous troops and war machines, but also in the story as well. There's no good guys, and your entire winning strategy is to try and gather the cast-off things that you need for survival and get out of the level. Extract, if you will, alive. You're not there to win the war or save the world like in most shooters. You're there to try and gather a few things to prolong your wretched life a little bit longer and not get blown up in the process. GRIMDARK might be something that Games Workshop invented, or at least inspired, but nowadays, Warhammer isn't the pinnacle of GRIMDARK. If anything, I'd say that Warhammer becomes a bit less GRIMDARK every year. Nowadays, there's a lot of games and settings and novels and comics and painters that are far more GRIMDARK. So if you're interested in checking out what GRIMDARK is, I'd tell you to start with the stuff that I talked about in this video and see where it takes you from there. Do you think that Warhammer is still the peak of GRIMDARKness? Do you want to see even more GRIMDARK content, or is GRIMDARK starting to go kind of over the line for you? Maybe it should be called something else now. I don't know. Let us all know what you think down in the comments below. And while you're down there in the GRIMDARK comments, some GRIMDARK depressmentation of the like button would brighten my day and help out the channel. And if you want to see more videos every single Friday, hit the subscribe button down there as well. It's free. Thanks for watching.